The Anbu Black Ops, a group so formidable that even the first databook can't help but note how the Hokage selects them personally, and their deadly attacks that break the enemy's defenses are as fast as light itself. A group where even the elite of the elite get let out. However, unfortunately, not much was ever done with them, and when fans think of them, they think about guys like this, instead of thinking about these two teenagers who scrapped with the strongest shinobi in the world, Fu and Torune, the man who slaughtered the strongest clan in the world in a single night, Itachi, and the most evil and powerful of all village enemies, Orochimaru. So when you look at it like this, you can come to realize just how formidable this group has always been, and why they aren't even far off from the most infamous criminal organization, the Akatsuki. So what would happen if the Anbu Black Ops were sent to kill the Akatsuki members, if Hidan had knowledge on all the members and the timeline added up, of course? You know, could the Anbu actually take on the Akatsuki? And since I have done a whole playlist discussing the Akatsuki with a ranking video in it, I figured why not have them ranked and have the, top most formidable Anbu face each member in the same slot. For example, the list might look something like this. The 5th strongest of the Akatsuki, Deidara, will face off against the 5th strongest member of the Anbu, Fu. The 7th strongest of each group, being Sasori and Orochimaru, will face off, and yeah, you get the point. And also, don't just run with these rankings as 100%, as other factors like group roles and styles are also being accounted for, such as how Pain probably isn't the strongest man in the Akatsuki, unless you use the 364 synopsis statement, but he is at number 1, and Danzo also probably isn't above Massacre Itachi, but is at number 1 as well. Anyway, apologies for the long-winded intro, but I suppose we can then just begin with our first match, being Anko versus Konan. And many would conclude this match to be dull and that Konan would win, likely due to Anko's lack of showings. However, this simply isn't true. Anko during a majority of part 1 is actually hyped up probably much more than you remember, such as how the first databook makes note of how she is actually the most dangerous kunoichi in Konoha, which coupled with her lower intelligence ranking, this would just be an overall combat such as speed and strength, which would be very deadly considering she was Orochimaru's earliest disciple and the first to survive the curse mark, which is pretty telling as she would go on to learn many snake prone techniques such as the multiple shadow striking snakes. By virtue of this praise of her being more dangerous than any kunoichi, she would likely just be stronger than ones like Kurenai, a genjutsu master, and while many people are very quick to write her out for being fodder, she actually is also just probably stronger than you think when you account for this databook entry, which notes a few things such as how although defeated, she managed to engage in an equal clash of genjutsu against even Itachi, which came from her not only disturbing Itachi but also overturning his genjutsu and nullifying it in the most crucial moment. Kurenai, unlike Anko, is praised for her intelligence and genjutsu, which is actually quite crucial to understanding her physical skills as well, as her intelligence is actually the exact same as her speed, taijutsu, and ninjutsu, all being one level only under her genjutsu. So when you consider how she could overturn Itachi's genjutsu and then react to Itachi's taijutsu enough to brace for the impact but not evade it, you have a solid line of Kurenai's scaling and her implications for her being around other Konoha Jonin such as Asuma and Kakashi. However, here Anko would just scale above this, likely by a large degree in terms of physical stats, as intellect isn't really a specific highlighted skill for her, which again she also had to have learned many things from Orochimaru, like her seemingful masterful use of shuriken throwing, and even her ability to utilize other fighters' hands to complete jutsu signs, something usually done by the top prodigies and powerhouses of the franchise. But a few examples would be like end of series Naruto, end of series Sasuke, Minato, Itachi, those are some guys. Whereas here's Anko doing this to Orochimaru's clone. Orochimaru right after this is then established to be in the fan book as the most powerful and evil of all village enemies, which contextually isn't in reference to the Leaf, but rather other villages, and Orochimaru would just be above the other criminals opposing those nations, placing him a top threat of shinobi against the villages. Konan's only showings of this caliber or anything like it would just be against Orochimaru's Sannin brethren, Jiraiya, where she was mentally out of it, resulting in Jiraiya blitzing her with his oil, which is also a counter to her, and then his following attack with his hair, which also blitzes her, but she could just be mental nerfed. And this leaves us with one problem for Konan, and it's just that we have no idea what she is really capable of outside of being mentally unwell and with years of prep time and 600 billion bombs. So this may come to a surprise, but Anko probably does beat Konan. Following that up with Hidan versus Sugaru, and for those who don't even know who Sugaru is, he was Danzo's right-hand man through most of the Itachi novels and is an Abarabe clan member with really adept beetles with things like paralytic poisons enough to stun and lead to the demise of Shisui, the same Shisui who is considered to be one of the most talented Uchiha ever and the greatest ever at body flicker according to Yashiro, and even Danzo believed that the combination of Shisui and Itachi is just above Fugaku, who was a candidate for Hokage, which is pretty consistent with how Shisui was originally set to assassinate Hiruzen, or at least abduct him. So this poison certainly doesn't care how strong you are, and for Hidan, this is especially bad, considering Sugaru's tactical way of approach where Hidan is kind of an idiot, and most notably how the poison is also just paralytic, meaning that it could counter the immortality by just paralyzing him and dropping him still to the floor. Sugaru's Achilles heel though would be how he doesn't really have any showings for his alive combat, except when he was burnt alive by Itachi at the end of the second novel, but this doesn't mean we can't scale him, considering that Hidan has scaling in relation to the lead Jonin like Asuma, who at his best being in CQC is close to Kakashi at some point, meaning that Kakashi is still obviously superior, and for a majority of the series, Kakashi is just weaker than his Anbu counterpart due to his depression, and that's just been accumulating for several years on top of his boring missions, so it's been pretty bad. So considering Sugaru is at the top of the foundation, and Kakashi, at his peak was at the top of the Anbu, you could certainly say that Sugaru could just beat up Hidan, or if you want to take even just a more conservative approach, then you could just say that he's in that higher Jonin tier, with him obviously being the top of the foundation, and could at least be relative to Asuma, where he could still catch Hidan off guard with the paralytic bugs, as that's all he really needs, is just a chance to catch him off guard and abuse Hidan's kind of idiotic style of fighting. So I would also give this one to Sugaru as well. Now, onto our first contentious and intricate fight, we have Sasori versus Orochimaru, and this was always implied to be a thing, as in, following Orochimaru's departure, there was always a rivalry of whether it be from their secret meetings or both believing they had a spy in the other's camp. This would likely follow out of a level of trust and mutual respect between Orochimaru, as he actually did know Sasori's true face and form, and when even, like his subordinates like Kabuto didn't. However, for this match, we obviously don't have any feats from this Anbu Orochimaru, and if we try to line up the timeline, this pre-Deidara, part like pairing Sasori, we don't have anything for him either unless you take the games. And I mean, even when Sasori destroys a nation according to the anime, it's with Deidara. So here, I would just be granting Orochimaru his part 1 counterpart and Sasori his full power counterpart in part 2. So, this should just conclude that Orochimaru would then be the superior. And while this may be a surprise, Sasori by this point is quite impressive though, capturing the third Kazekage and transforming him into a puppet, keeping all of his human traits and even his original chakra, granting Sasori the ultimate power of all puppet users, because his puppets don't just keep the bodies but the abilities as well. And the third Kazekage was revered as the strongest shinobi of his time, although this would likely just be among the Sand Village, considering we know he disappeared 10 years ago or a little over, and notable reputations of that time would have been Hokage Minato, a younger Hiruzen, and Anbu Kakashi. So it's probably just about Suna, which is probably pretty consistent considering how they're just their peak Jonin in Baki isn't even massively above the lower Jonin of Konoha. So the third Kazekage having power that's like maybe near the Hokage level is probably just the strongest shinobi ever to Suna, and he also just does have power that's beyond Bijou, as implied by Chiyo states how it's actually the most feared weapon in all of Tsunegakure. However, the manner of death and how Sasori managed to assassinate him is totally ambiguous, and we're left with the conclusion that he did kill him. For the manga, all we really get is how Sasori notes he was hard to finish, hence to why it's his favorite puppet, which is likely just referring to the process of transforming him into the puppet while still keeping his chakra intact. However, the data book may actually give us a glimpse at his manner of death, where it states that a difficult opponent defeated, then turned into a puppet, is pure ego gold for Sasori, end quote. This is very interesting, as it does not only note how the third was an opponent and was defeated. However, this interpretation, if you do this, is you're really left with only two options, right? Being like A, Sasori is massively stronger than him, and the lore around him was either over-exaggerated or false, as we get into Sasori's physical scaling in a minute, Or B, Sasori managed to kill him in a rather disingenuous way, like snaring him with one of his puppets and killing him maybe via poison, or just catching him another way with the poison where he's like off guard, and then maybe fought him whenever he was still weakened from it, which would leave him defeated and still an opponent for Sasori, so his lore wouldn't be completely destroyed that way. Sasori being able to utilize his sheer skill with the puppets to catch the third may just be plausible with Sasori's reputation as either an extremely notable or the greatest puppeteer ever, depending on which translation you use for his fourth data book entry. However, the reason all this would be relevant would be because Sasori tends to always consider himself his greatest work, and hence the strongest, placing him above the third Kazekage, who is stated to be the strongest Kazekage of all time, placing him above Rasa, that Orochimaru assassinated, and Kazekage Gaara, who was defeated by Deidara. And when you consider that this high-end scaling for both kind of just leads to Sasori only being around Deidara level, it is kind of consistent. And even if you further this line of scaling, as some do, where you compare Rasa to Warheart Gaara, who would have been able to intercept the version 2 Raikage's attack on Sasuke, which both of those points do have issues, which should be noted, whether it be how like it presupposes that Rasa's sand and Gaara's sand are the same way, or that the Raikage's speed doesn't change in the air. It still doesn't make a difference, as we are made aware how Orochimaru was able to combat and fight on par with Old Man Hiruzen, where the two fighters were hailed as equals in the fan book, which is pretty crucial for Orochimaru's scaling, as this same book notes how Hiruzen stands at the top of Konoha and at the peak of the shinobi world on 2 different times, which would mean that by extension Orochimaru would as well, which would also just align how he's stated to be the most powerful and evil of all village enemies, potentially just placing him above Sasori outright. But that's just irrelevant, as even if you give Sasori his, scaling to the version 2 Raikage or just under, you would also just have to grant the exact same to Orochimaru without giving him any of those leaps in logic for it. This gets supported when you consider how Orochimaru in his fight with Hiruzen had his arms sealed away and became much weaker. However, even when we pick back up with no arms Orochimaru, we could see how he acclimated to it, where he was able to fight on par with V2 Four Tails Naruto. As we know, Orochimaru does just leap over Naruto's extended arm and reacts to the attack, and then can form his body out of his own mouth to then punch Naruto in the face. And while many people do agree that Orochimaru is the strongest Sannin, the way they agree upon this is kind of weird, as this encounter isn't really brought up when it should be, as we know that Jiraiya also fought this exact same Naruto and suffered serious wounds, being even close to death, which is pretty consistent with the 2 panels we get from this battle from both Naruto and Jiraiya's perspectives, where they both show that Jiraiya was wounded and propped up against rubble. However, the background rubble isn't the same, implying this happened twice, meaning that a full power Jiraiya was just getting cornered like this twice and probably beat up, where he then managed to catch Naruto, and Orochimaru was able to actually get ripped in half, yet was perfectly fine due to his style of fighting just being superior to Jiraiya, because he can utilize things like this and literally just attach his organs back together via snakes. The same Jiraiya who is comparable to Tsunade, who actually used to humiliate Chiyo in the war, who can now keep up and react equally with Sasori with her aid of Sakura, who albeit did worse than Chiyo, but was still able to process most of his plans and attacks with at least her perception, with her being able to actually react combatively in some instances. This being the same Sakura who was totally perception blitzed by base heavy Sasuke, already placing this Sasuke certainly above Sasori in speed, which is probably just consistent with how Naruto, following his victory of Kakuzu, still believed that Sasuke was stronger than him. However, this same Sasuke tried to kill a sick, bedridden Orochimaru, and he didn't even attempt a typical confrontation and tried to just stream a Chidori through the door and stab him on his bed. And yes, Orochimaru still reacted to it by fully putting his arms up and crossing them, and even another time when Sasuke tries to channel more chakra into the Chidori and pierce his arms, where he then just moves it out of the line of damage. It gets even worse though, as when Sasuke amps himself up further by emerging his curse mark, which amps his speed, and activating his Sharingan, which grants him precognition and speed, he still gets reacted to by this bedridden Orochimaru, who just goes into his true form, proving that Orochimaru likely did just stand at the top of the shinobi world for a while, and has been of a greater threat than Sasori for almost the entire series. I mean, even when he's on his bed, he's reacting to an amped up Sasuke who could perception blitz Sakura, who visually kept up with all of Sasori's attacks, meaning that Orochimaru's speed while in the bed is probably above Sasori, and this means that with Orochimaru's intellect, arsenal, and speed advantage, there isn't much for Sasori to actually be able to do to come out with a win on Orochimaru, as he just has many win cons such as his Kusanagi blade that was rivaling Enma, the strongest of all animal summons, which is pretty telling as he can telekinetically control the blade, shoot the blade out of his mouth like a projectile, or just wield it normally to stab the core, or even just sever the puppet strings, as Omoe in the war is just shown doing this. So by all means, Orochimaru has many win cons over Sasori, and I didn't even grant him the Edo Hokage or the Edo 3rd Kazekage, which would just be able to help him here. Now, the next match would be Shisui versus Kakuzu, and this match is rather interesting, or at least more interesting than I initially thought. Shisui is really implied to be a lore monster, with him possessing the strongest genjutsu ever and being renowned as the greatest ever at body flicker, which that statement at face value probably needs a lot of skepticism considering it's Yashiro who claims this, and he tends to be very biased in Uchiha prideful affairs, such as his disdain for Minato ever being Hokage, believing that Fugaku was a much better candidate, despite that just not being true. This leaves us with almost diddly squat for Shisui. However, I myself have argued that he could perception blitz Danzo, as he does utilize a right hand tiger every time he body flickers, and Danzo doesn't know Shisui's body flickering until he's gone, implying that the movement of that right hand may have perception blitzed Danzo when he went to kill him in the novels, whose left eye probably might have not even changed up until he fights Sasuke, as the other Sharingan could have just been drawing upon that eye. And obviously Danzo never gets perception blitzed by Sasuke, making Shisui hence above Kage Summit Sasuke. However, this is a very broad and generous interpretation for Shisui, which is something I noted in my last video, but that's basically all we have, and the skepticism could still be placed on that argument, like how Danzo might have just been focused or not been focused in that moment, considering how Shisui was stumbling and was just hit with a paralytic poison and he should be dead. Or maybe Shisui did do the right hand tiger, but just closer to his hip, where Danzo would be focused on his eyes. And with that, I understand if you would subscribe to this argument, as it does help explain a lot about Shisui and how he was deemed to be so strong, being nearly the peak of the clan, yet was killed by Danzo due to a paralytic poison. But you could still just ground the same consistency for this just by saying that Shisui was very strong, but died due to the poison, and he just didn't have any feats as well to hurt his, being so strong kind of lore. Although Shisui, I would say that he is at least approaching the top tier fighters in Konoha during this time, when you consider how his fireball, alongside Fugaku's, is at the top of the clan, as Itachi gloated the size of his, stating that only Shisui and his father could make one of that size, implying that they could make one either equal or greater to it. And for the Uchiha, the fireball is what actually kind of defines you as a shinobi. And I'm not even joking when I say this. The 3rd anime profile guys discusses how the fireball is a technique that the Uchiha clan prides themselves upon, where it states many things like you cannot even be acknowledged as a full-fledged shinobi until you've mastered it. So his being at the top, this being related to just your, being a shinobi overall, this probably could just correlate to Shisui being at the top of the clan, which would fit with his reputation as we mentioned before. So yeah, this would probably just imply that Shisui is closing in on the top of Konoha in terms of power. However, Kakuzu just is as well, considering he beat up Hashirama. Wait, no. Kakuzu probably just is as well, because he is more than capable of clashing and rivaling Kakashi, the strongest Jonin in Konoha, as stated in both the data book and fan book, as we can see Kakuzu just react to him on numerous occasions, such as here where he's able to get in and intercept Kakashi's Raikiri charge, which of course wasn't near its speed limit, as Kakashi only took like 2 steps, but it still shows that Kakuzu can react to him in just typical combat speed, which is something his partner Hidan could also do, as shown when he matches his speed and moves alongside him, and then when he pushes Kakashi on the back foot, which would mean that Kakuzu could just do the same, as he's implied to be the dangerous one by not just Kakashi but also Hidan himself, who kind of just admits that Kakuzu does most of the work for their duo. However, Kakuzu's taijutsu isn't his specialty. That would be his heart's ninjutsu, which is also just so strong that even the Lightning Heart's False Darkness alone was able to equal out 2 Raikiri at the same time. This Raikiri being a technique that Kakashi seems to to hold as one of his best jutsu. The wind heart was able to blast off Kakashi's jacket, which is impressive, but the data book relates it to a natural disaster, and Kakuzu can just combine that heart with ones like the fire, which just overpowered Kakashi's water style despite the type advantage. However, for Shisui, his worst disadvantage in fighting Kakuzu would be his earth style heart, which grants him his diamond morph, which is a form that basically hardens his skin to where physical attacks are practically useless, meaning that Shisui's body flicker style of fighting probably would just be an issue, as Kakuzu could just harden himself and have his hearts overwhelm Shisui, meaning that Shisui's only two win cons would be Kodo Matsukami and the Susanoo, and the only evidence for the latter even being canon to the manga would just be how Kishimoto drew the drill in the Naruto 99 official artwork, where he kind of just drew it instead of the sword that's simply on his back, but this doesn't really do much as there's nothing to prove this is canon to the manga. It just acknowledges that Kishimoto might have chose it over his normal sword. However, even if the Kodo did come out, then I mean, yes, he would just best Kakuzu. He control his mind without Kakuzu even knowing, and then this would just cause him to throw the fight, giving Shisui the win. However, Shisui ever using this in character is basically off the table, as he doesn't even use it when he nearly died to Danzo, but just left to give it to Itachi rather than beating Danzo to potentially get the help he needed. But if you just say that for this match that this is the new mission, not to save the clan, this right here, kill Kakuzu, then I could see it, but it's just usually just very unlikely, meaning that unfortunately for my boy Shisui, if we aren't giving him his most generous interpretations and out of character fighting style, then Kakuzu would probably win more times than not, with a pretty difficult fight though on his hands. You could say that each could win like 5 out of 5 times, but I wouldn't. Again, I'd say it's probably more like Kakuzu could win 6 or 7 out of 10 times, and since the Akatsuki haven't won a match yet, I mean, I feel I should give it to them, making the score now 3-1 for the Anbu's lead. Our next match is very similar to our last one, moving on with the consistent theme for the Anbu having more implicit scaling, whereas the Akatsuki have more direct scaling. But here, in this case, I won't hold you guys up too much because it basically just relies on how you interpret Fu and Torune scaling in relation to Obito. And while the case for Fu isn't as good for Torune, it is still certainly there. But right now, I know some of you guys, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, are probably asking, well, how the hell is this close? Obito was clearly holding back and was massively above everybody in the summit, which kind of just isn't true. Obito holding back on them makes no sense, and it's never implied to be the case. In fact, it's quite the opposite, with the praise he gives Torune, which we'll come back to when the time comes, but Obito himself compliments their deduction ability after they test his Kamui and counter it via Torune throwing a kunai faster than Obito can punch to force Obito to actually deactivate his materialization, where they then fully understood Kamui, something only the geniuses of the verse could ever do, but Fu and Torune are the youngest characters to ever do it, with the closest one being Itachi, who didn't even fully comprehend it. This is consistent with how Obito then tells Danzo he chose his subordinates well, which, when you consider the situation of these characters, it's kind of insane. Danzo's last right-hand men were Sugaru and Orochimaru, and Fu and Torune are meant to be not only the replacements to them, but also his bodyguards for when he's going to go try something really sketchy on the strongest shinobi in the entire world, the 5 Kage, and all the top Jonin of all those villages who are guarding them. And he said, yeah, I think Fu and Torune, they've got my back. They're fit for the job. To literally, they're fit for the job to protect him. And they did. They protected him. They instantly deduced Kamui and held off Obito, the man who just declared war upon the entire shinobi continent. So, this is just consistent, and Obito isn't massively above every summit fighter, as we do know he began to Kamui to save Sasuke, and then Sasuke was just capable of fully rising his Susanoo faster than the Kamui suck for Obito to go save him. And while this is Sasuke's fastest form of combat, or close to, it's still pretty telling how Fu and Torune probably were performing well against a serious Obito. So, let me ask you this, could Fu just snipe Deidara out of the air with a mind transfer when Deidara is yapping? The mind transfer is a pretty impressive jutsu as well, considering even Ino's mind transfer nearly worked on Rinnegan Obito in the war, so imagine Fu's. an S-class shinobi, Danzo's right-hand man. Fu also just has a really bad counter to Deidara's style of fighting, being his bombs with the chakra, but Fu is a sensory shinobi, one adept enough to where Torune actually considered if he could sense Obito despite him not even being in a material form. So he could just likely sense all of the bomb's chakra, and then know that Deidara is, we also just know that like Deidara is just below heavy Sasuke in terms of his raw combat speed, as shown when Sasuke nearly blitzes him from a far distance, where Deidara could only react in the last moment, which is made more evident by how when the distance is much closer, Deidara blows the bomb up in his face and states he barely managed to escape, hidden in the bomb blast. And if the fight does manage to go on longer, then I think Deidara could hold a little bit of an advantage, through things like C4. However, that's even questionable considering Fu's sensory abilities. So all in all, since Fu is much stronger than what you might think, despite not only having one showing, this showing is much more consistent than, say, Shisui's higher lines of scaling, which could contradict certain things if you don't argue them in certain ways, whereas Fu's scaling works no matter what, and is probably just pretty consistent with, again, his lore that I presented. So I think the fight is close for sure, but I actually would probably just give this match to Fu. Following that match, we have Torune versus Kisame, and this one is basically the exact same for how Torune is implied to be the stronger of the two, as implied by Obito, when he makes the claim that Danzo assembled impressive subordinates due to how Torune's venomous nano beetles aren't chakra and work like bacteria, and he states that you're an Aburame clan shinobi who knows secret ninjutsu. You must be Shikado Aburame's brat. You've got beetle antibodies against those beetles. Your foundation. Well, Danzo, you've assembled an impressive array of subordinates, end quote. And this is before Torune infects Obito, causing him to literally have to rip off his arm. So even Obito, who literally was an ability, he literally has an ability to dematerialize his body, was caught by Torune. And Kisame shouldn't be an exception either. If you simply touch Torune, you're screwed. So you need your one attack to be the win con, and Obito's was. Moreover, Kisame's fighting style is basically the exact opposite, where he gains a progressive advantage the longer the fight wages on due to his large chakra reserves and chakra absorbing abilities like this form of the shark bomb, and just his main asset being Samehada, which if Kisame tries to absorb the nano beetles, then they will also just kill Samehada or himself. And if he does try to tries to like absorb them in the same manner where he absorbed the electrical stun, where he just kind of let it pierce him and then chose to absorb the chakra, he's done for. Like, he can't try this. Kisame's primary way of fighting in character is with Samehada in Kenjutsu battles, or just Kenjutsu in general, as shown against B, his old Miss comrades, Itachi when they sparred in the games, and he even tried to pull it out on Yagura upon seeing him, rather than just flooding the room with his water style. So, when you account for his manner of battle against Guy, that's only a real last resort type of battle tactic, or if you think he was more amped up there, as I have heard that interpretation, then maybe it's like that, but it's not really that in character for him. If Samehada or a blade isn't in the equation, then sure. This would mean that Torune, with him likely being at least in these tiers of power as well, would be able to kill Kisame with the nano beetles, and even if you grant Kisame an advantage, then however he tries to, how he still tries to capitalize on beating Torune, something will die, either him or Samehada, whenever he tries to touch him and absorb him. This is pretty consistent for Kisame, as in the Akatsuki novel, Kisame and Itachi have a run-in with poisonous bees, and Kisame gets stung off rip. And if you get stung twice, you're dead. So Itachi literally tells him to just hide himself in the water prison to drown the bees before they reach him. So yeah, the poison is a clear win con, and Kisame has been shown reckless when opposed by it. So Kisame's most diverse ability would by far be his Shark Bomb, which not only has this small one-arm form that's capable of overpowering base Guy, a form capable of equaling out a Hirudora that could absorb chakra, and even a small form that Kisame can hop inside of to swim massive bodies of water. However, all three of these have practically no use against Torune other than just this miniature one, which could just overpower him to offset his balance, and then what? We run into the same problem. Kisame can't do much to follow that up with. So while I think Kisame is the stronger fighter, like I'd probably say that for sure, maybe I don't know, speed could be close, but definitely the stronger fighter, I actually do still think that Torune very well could win if you subscribe to his speed scaling, and even if you don't, he's still considered to be like the peak of the foundation when Guy and Kakashi are around the peak of the Jonin, so they also could just be very comparable, at least considering Guy's performance and whatnot. And I mean, I am a Kisame guy, like check out my Kisame versus the Akatsuki video, but here Torune probably wins like 6 out of 10 times. Moving on to Anbu Kakashi versus Itachi. This one is pretty interesting, as my boy Sage of Thick Calves has been pushing the Anbu Kakashi meta, who is actually quite strong and has always been implied to be above his part 1 counterpart, as that version has gone rusty, and that's mainly just due to his lack of missions that were thrilling and his boredom, which is made apparent by how Kakashi, by virtue of being an Anbu captain, would be stronger than a character named Mukai Kohinada, who in the novels was able to be a young Itachi and Shisui until Shisui was forced to don the MS, and Danzo by this time also believed that the combination of Shisui and Itachi couldn't be matched by anyone else in the clan, which would include Fugaku, the leader. And this is really telling for Kakashi by this point, as if you remember, the Uchiha clan is called the strongest clan and is actually synonymous with public order itself, as the village owes all of its peace to the Uchiha, as stated here. So Kakashi scaling above Fugaku means that he would actually probably be approaching that Hokage level of power, and this is pretty interesting, as this could imply that he's just under Hiruzen's level of power, who is stated in the first pan book to stand at the peak of not only Konoha, but the world at large. And this Hiruzen prior to the massacre would just be much stronger, especially considering if you believe his age is a linear decrease in power from his prime, meaning that since this massacre Hiruzen has 3 wrinkles, whereas against Orochimaru he has 4 to 5 wrinkles, he is visibly younger here, and this statement would apply. Even more so, which aligns with how Kabuto notes he's the strongest of all 5 principal territories, which would have to be based on the last time they ever saw Hiruzen fight, which probably would have been around here. And this, so Hiruzen at both points kind of just does stand at the peak of the world, but this isn't really all that much to Itachi, as Itachi in just his 3 Tomoe Sharingan humiliated Orochimaru so bad that he left the Akatsuki, where both the manga and anime profile guides corroborate this, saying that he's just stronger, making it also just consistent with how this blind and nearly dead Itachi, who is about to have a heart attack, is blitzing him and slicing him up in his strongest form, being the 8-headed Hydra that's compared to a dragon god and a serpent that surpasses even Orochimaru himself. Itachi during his Akatsuki days is also just established to be stronger than Kage-sama Sasuke, paralleling Pain, who's stronger than Sage Naruto, as they are the 2 narrative bosses for them per se, with the 4th databook noting how Sasuke surpassed Itachi in EMS, which is very consistent with how Sasuke is compared to Itachi numerous times, such as how his Genjutsu is stated to be a far cry from Itachi's, the gap being so large it would be a night and day difference. This same Sasuke, whilst nearly blind, would have killed Kakashi if it wasn't for Kamui, which is something that Anbu Kakashi doesn't utilize, despite his raw combat speed likely being much closer to this version of Kakashi rather than his part 1 variant. But this is also just telling how a fight with Itachi could go, and this isn't to say that Itachi would beat up Anbu Kakashi, as I do think the MS is probably necessary, but that's about it, whereas something like Tsukiyomi or Amaterasu could just put him down, and he could always just resort to the Susanoo, which means that this Akatsuki Itachi just has probably grown a little bit too much from when he was close to this Kakashi whilst both were captains. So yeah, Itachi wins, making the score now 5-2. Onto another Itachi match, weirdly enough, we have Itachi versus Orange Mask Obito, and since I've talked about Itachi in almost every video for the last month, and the scan here is always one that's brought up, I don't want to repeat the same thing over and over and just cause ad nauseum, but we do have a direct confrontation between those two, being just prior when Itachi joined the Akatsuki, where after exchanging dangerous words, they acknowledge each other as opponents, whereas in their previous encounter 4 years prior, Itachi was so inferior that he couldn't couldn't even move when trying to process Obito's body. But now they are much closer, and Itachi then goes on to get much stronger through the massacre, gaining both the Tsukiyomi no Materasu and Obito likely gaining in power due to like a decade more of experience, but that's about all. And yeah, the rest is fully interpretational. So do you think this massacre Itachi is stronger than Orange Mask Obito? Yes, no, well, to answer that, it's probably no. And the reason I would say this is because all of the comparisons of Obito being wary of Itachi come after he's much stronger and he has like the Yadamir and Totsuka blade and probably Izanami as well, honing the MS even more and you know whatnot. So Obito likely does just win this match, and it's pretty simple. So yeah, if you want more of Itachi versus Obito, I do have a video on that for just their Akatsuki versus Akatsuki versions. Now, finally, we have our last match being the leaders of the respective groups being both Danzo and Pain. However, considering Pain's lore of solo stomping the entire Leaf Village and beating Sage Naruto, this Sage Naruto being a combatant stage to have surpassed Jiraiya and Senjutsu skills, and likely just overall in ability as well when you consider how Pain, with only 3 of his less combative paths, was just above Jiraiya in Sage mode, and even a base Jiraiya is a fighter considered to be a better Hokage candidate than Kakashi on 2 occasions, and even relative to a base Orochimaru who just fear hacks this Kakashi as well, or this part 1 Kakashi, and Orochimaru also just battled Hiruzen, someone who Danzo always considered to be ahead of him upon his death, referencing this old man Hiruzen, whereas he himself is now far stronger due to the arm of the Sharingan, and Hiruzen's not, which, while many people love to just attribute this to Hiruzen being ideologically perceived or publicly favored more than Danzo due to him obtaining the Hokage position, many people forget that in the Sakura novel, it does state that Danzo fought Hiruzen for that title, and he lost, which could also just be implied from the manga as well, which is pretty consistent when you consider the games as canon, when Minato fought Hiruzen for the title and won. So Danzo could have contested this Hiruzen at any time, but didn't, which is pretty telling, as this was his whole goal, yet he never attempted it. Speaking about just how there isn't really a way to say that Danzo is stronger than Pain whilst in his battle against Sasuke, which is a fight almost always utilized out of context, as no matter what section of the fight you really do pull from, when Danzo does well, it's clear as to the reason why. When Sasuke instantly kills Danzo with a Materasu, which seemed to drain him as he's already fatigued, and Sasuke then drops out of the Susanoo, making it the perfect moment for Danzo to use his vacuum style from behind Sasuke to catch him off guard, where Sasuke is fatigued and just lost his Susanoo, whereas Danzo is fresh and behind him with an attack ready, which Sasuke then just kind of tanks and then reacts to after with his Summoning Hawk, which Danzo then responds to trying another vacuum style, once again, which since Sasuke isn't backwards and off guard, he just jumps over to then match Danzo's charge and then utterly blitzing him. And while you may note Danzo does touch Sasuke's throat first, that's rather irrelevant as Sasuke is already cutting through the entire body and the arm, after which Danzo simply couldn't react to, resulting in his death. I mean, bro, it gets worse. Like, what is this? Like, when Sasuke can totally raise the Susanoo up, like, entirely before Danzo's full speed mid-swing blade could even move. I mean, bro, what's this panel? What is this? And this would just be the same Sasuke who would go on to be called equals with Sage Naruto, and on a few separate occasions with both Naruto and the 4 data book, noting how if they fought, they would have died, just showing how Danzo could have probably performed against Pain at this time, which just is pretty bad, seeing as Pain could battle Sage Naruto, who had prepped Toads at Mount Miyaboku, storing nature energy for him, and Pain could still react to him in several instances, such as here, which is what he could do, and he can, there's really just not much. Like, there's not much. I'm trying to think of something to say. There's really not much for Danzo to do. Like, Danzo's win style couldn't really do anything, and, if he could always just Shinra Tensei it back, and then just do the same to Danzo, like, throw him into the ground, which is very in character for him to be, like, in this bloodlusted approach, considering Danzo was a part of the killing of Yahiko. Pain could even perform the stream, like, strategy he did whilst in Edo, where he would fire the Shinra Tensei from inside the invisible chameleon. So, I mean, like, what is there to say? Danzo is someone who got bullied by a rival to a character Pain beat up and beat. And I mean, even with the Akatsuki members being in play, the third data book still calls Pain invincible. And whether you believe that either Itachi or Obito are actual members, it's still irrelevant, seeing as these other S-class fighters are here and can't even touch Pain. So yeah, that's the video. If you guys did enjoy them, please consider liking and subscribing, as it would be greatly appreciated. I work harder on these videos and I do more research than the other guy, I promise. So do us both a favor and subscribe, or just peep more of my content. But with that, I am curious to see what you guys thought in the comments below, as this is a very untouched topic where I figured why not delve into a few ways the peak Anbu could have actually beaten some of the Akatsuki members, which is certainly plausible as the final score is 5-4. But yeah, have a good day, God bless, and as always, love you guys.